on time.
This call is now being recorded. This call is now taking notes.
The Pan-African Writers Association has been operating since the 1980s. This is one of Africa's oldest literary associations. PAWA has created a committee for young writers so that we can improve our skills. We encourage all of you to participate in PAWA's programs, and we want you to set the agenda. What is it that you need? What do you require to become a great writer? This is the first workshop that we're doing as the Young Writers Committee, and it won't be the last one. Today, we're going to hear from 10 poets, young Africans just like you, who have poetic knowledge to share. I encourage you to ask questions in the chat. The chat is your space. Feel free to express yourself there. And our facilitators, who are coming from all corners of Africa, will go into the chat when they're available to respond to you. Do keep yourself muted, please, so as not to disturb the proceedings when our facilitators are speaking. This is a recorded session. I would like to acknowledge the Pan-African Writers Association, the leaders of PAWA. Thank you so much for being here with us today and for empowering us to improve our situations. It isn't easy to be a writer in Africa, but here we are using our available resources to improve, to get better, to do something so that we can be the great poets like Wole Soyinka or Ama-Ata Aidoo. I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker. Professor Aderemi Raji-Oyelade is a Nigerian poet writing in English. He is popularly known by his pen name, Remi Raji. He is a Salisbury Fellow and visiting professor and writer to a number of institutions, among them Southern Illinois University at Edwardsville, the Universities of California at Riverside and Irvine, the University of Cape Town in South Africa, and the University of Cambridge. Professor Raji, has had scholarly essays published in journals, including Research in African Literatures and African Literature Today. He has read his poems widely in Africa, Europe, and America. In 2005, he served as the guest writer to the city of Stockholm in Sweden. And he is our keynote speaker today. To the young poets, listen up. What Professor Raji has achieved is where we want to go. Let's learn something. The floor is open. Over to you, Prof. You're welcome.
Okay, thank you very much, moderator. I just joined right in time, and here is to welcome all of us to this special program. I greet everyone, good afternoon, Africa, by being invited to give a keynote with a very tantalizing title. Are you able to hear me? Can you hear me now?
Okay, yes, Prof, please go ahead.
So yeah, thank you very much. So I've been asked to give a keynote titled Ingredients of a Great Poem. I hope I'm allowed or I'm permitted to share my screen. I want to share just about 12 slides or thereabout, for audience. I hope I'm able to do that, but I'm not sure if I have it says I'm not allowed to share my screen. Okay. I can then speak extempore because I have some slides that I really wish to share. I can send this to the moderator or to the organizers so that you can share it.
Yes, please, Prof.
Yes?
Please do share.
Okay. Yeah, I will, but what I'm saying now is I'm not allowed to share my screen unless the host turns on the screen sharing option. But then again, the title of my presentation is Ingredients of a Great Poem. So I start by stating that any discussion of the qualities of a great poem must begin with an admission of difficulty, because poetry itself resists definition over time. Perhaps no literary form has inspired more attempts at definition or generated more disagreement than poetry. So what is poetry? Perhaps we can, okay, now I'm allowed to share screen, so if you allow me just a second more, I should be able to do that. Okay. Yeah, so I hope, moderator, I hope you can see this. Okay, thank you very much.
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. So, yeah. So I was saying that any discussion of the qualities of a great poem must begin with an admission of difficulty, because poetry itself resists definition. Perhaps no literary form has inspired more definition, and every age, every culture, and almost every significant poet has sought to answer the question, what is poetry? The title of this lecture appears deceptively simple, the ingredients of a great poem. It is suggestive of a culinary metaphor, that somewhere there exists a recipe, a literary cookbook, in which there is a menu for an exquisitely prepared meal from which greatness may be served with measured quantities of metaphor, of rhythm, of imagery and emotion to nourish the reader. I wish poetry was so obedient. If greatness could be manufactured, every poet would produce masterpieces. If poetry were merely technique, every competent craftsman will become immortal. But history teaches us otherwise. We have thousands of poems, hundreds of good poems and poets, but we have only a handful that continue to breathe across centuries. But then, greatness is not a recipe after all. It is a discipline. A great poem is seasoned with imagination, but restrained by craft. It is nourished by conviction, yet it is refined by beauty. So, what separates the merely competent from the unforgettable? What allows one poem to survive its historical moment, while another quietly disappears into literary oblivion? That is the question before us. So let us ask the question that directly responds to the subject of our present concern. When does a poem become great? In this time, I'm referring to a poem written in any language. When does it become great? T.S. Eliot, in his writings, criticism, has cautioned against reducing poetry to paraphrasable meaning. He reminds us that genuine poetry can communicate before it is understood. And this observation suggests that poetry reaches us not only through the intellect, but through rhythm, through image, sound, memory, and intuition. But before Eliot, Alexander Pope saw poetry as what is oft was thought, but never so well expressed. Wordsworth described poetry as a spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings recollected in tranquility. P.B. Shelley elevated poets to the rank of unacknowledged legislators of the world, while Coleridge conceived poetic imagination as a creative power that echoes, however imperfectly, the original act of divine creation. As the African poets repeatedly reminds us, Oshunari, poetry demands discipline no less than inspiration. As he said, it is not an esoteric whisper, but it is an accessible ditty, a kind of song which is close to the lyric of the marketplace. So, I ask again, when does a poem become great? Now, the primal ingredient, for me, what I see as the primal ingredient of greatness for any work of art, poetry, particularly in this time, is that of truth, the expression of eternal truth. Because if poetry itself defies definition, it is almost impossible to come to just one answer of what is or what are ingredients of poetry. What I'm trying to do now is to tease out a couple of primary and primal ingredients that will connect with the greatness of poetry. So there are good poems and there are bad poems according to the taste of the reader. But how do we recognize the greatness in the poem? Not simply good or merely accomplished, for greatness is different from competence. A great poem is never merely an arrangement of beautiful words. At its highest level, in whatever language, poetry becomes a form of truth-telling. The African-American poet Nikki Giovanni argues that poetry performs an archival and generative function beyond the reach of conventional disciplines. As she said, we cannot possibly leave it to history as a discipline, nor to sociology, nor science, nor economics, to tell the story of our people. In this sense, great poetry contains a measure of timeless truth. It confronts the recurring dilemmas of humanity, love and justice, and oppression, memory and hope, mortality and transcendence. Every truly great poem carries within it something that remains relevant beyond the historical moment of its composition. The Polish-American poet Czesław Miłosz, in his work, poses the question with characteristic urgency when we're speaking of poetry, the dialectic of poetry and truth. He asks poetically, what is poetry which does not save nations or people? It connives with official lies. It is this question that every poet must answer, and perhaps every reader should use as some kind of touchstone to understand the element or the ingredients of great poetry. Great poetry resists falsehood. It interrogates power. It unsettles complacency and preserves the moral imagination. But having talked about the importance of the message, the conveyor of truth, eternal and combustible truth that poetry should serve, we cannot leave out that ingredient of craft. And so I go on to what I call poetry as conviction and craft. In an interview about a decade ago, which I gave to a Swiss literary journal, I noted that I believe that the magic of poetry is in the truth that it spins. The true poet thirsts after truth, feeds others with the tablet, however sour or bitter. But the quality of his or her success inheres in the ability to embellish and say things in beautiful measures. A combination of conviction and creativity is required of the poet who hopes to influence others or to serve great poetry as menu. In other words, I push that truth alone is not sufficient because poetry is not journalism. Its truths acquire permanence through artistic form, and conviction must be matched by craftsmanship. A great poem is great craft beyond the truth that it speaks. It's a column of intense emotion supported by vivid imagery, memorable rhythm, and imaginative language. And I note that every great poem leaves behind a line, a phrase, or an image that continues to resonate long after the page has been closed. This was what the critic refers to as the touchstone of the poem, the magic line that always resonates in the memory of the reader from generation to generation. Now, the tradition of poetic greatness, if you speak of traditional poetic greatness, through civilizations, we've had traditions of poetic greatness. Every civilization that has cultivated poetry has also reflected on the nature of poetic greatness. From the earliest oral traditions of humanity to the literary cultures of classical antiquity and the modern world, certain poems have endured while countless others have faded into silence. That enduring presence, that memorability of the poem is itself an important clue to greatness. A great poem does not merely belong to its own time. It continues to find new readers, new meanings, and new lives across generations. If I may go down the lane of these civilizations, from Homer's Iliad and Odysseys to Virgil's Aeneid, from Chaucer and Shakespeare to John Milton, Alexander Pope, William Wordsworth, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, John Keats, W.B. Yeats, T.S. Eliot, and Seamus Heaney, the English and European traditions have continually renewed poetry's expressive possibilities. France gave us Charles Baudelaire and Arthur Rimbaud. Germany gave us Wolfgang von Goethe and Heinrich Heine. Croatia gave us Gustav Mahler and Dobroslav Serajic. Hungary gave us Sándor Petőfi. In Slovenia, there is Franz Prešeren. Russia has its Alexander Pushkin and Anna Akhmatova.
Niggas.
Ukraine gave us Taras Shevchenko, whose poetry became a powerful emblem of
What
national
the
identity.
hell? This
Spain gave us Federico Garcia Lorca. Latin America produced Pablo Neruda and Cesar Vallejo. In the Arab world, we have Mahmoud Darwish, Israel, Yehuda Amichai, India, Rabindranath Tagore, Persia, Jalaluddin Rumi, China, Hai Xing, and the plural multiverse of American Walt Whitman, Robert Frost,
hello, everybody.
Hughes, and the Jamaican-born Claude McKay,
Danny.
whose poetry crossed national
Danny's your-
boundaries to become part of the world's moral imagination. For Africa, Africa has its own poetic inheritance, and it is no less rich or distinguished. From the oral poetics and the oral epics of the griot and praise singers to its sophisticated lyrical traditions, the continent has continually renewed the possibilities of poetic expression. Senegal's Leopold Sédar Senghor transformed the lyric into a vehicle of cultural affirmation and the philosophy of negritude. The Republic of Congo, Shikaya,
Hey man, I have a question for you.
a fiercely
What the
imaginative
fuck do
and
you?
surreal poetic language through which history, violence, and exile acquired haunting symbolic power. Nigeria's Christopher Okibo fused classical resonance with Igbo cosmology in a poetry of extraordinary symbolic density. Gabriel Okara expanded the expressive possibilities of English through the rhythms and sensibilities of the African persona. And Wole Soyinka demonstrated how myth, history, metaphysics, and political conscience could coexist within a single poetic imagination. Ghana's Kofi Awuno drew upon the deges and oral traditions of the Ewe to fashion an elegiac modern voice. South Africa's Dennis Brutus transformed the lyric into an instrument of moral witness and resistance against apartheid. And Munene restored the epic grandeur of Zulu oral traditions to modern literature. Africa's poetic tradition has also continued to reinvent itself in successive generations. Nigeria's New Oshunari reimagined the language of African poetry, a voice that is at once lyrical and accessible, philosophically resonant and politically engaged, rooted in oral performance, yet unmistakably contemporary. Somalia's Adrawi elevated oral poetry into a powerful medium of philosophical reflection and national consciousness. Egypt's Hamed Fawad Negim gave enduring voice to the aspirations of ordinary people through vernacular verse, and Sudan's Muhammad al-Faturi explored questions of African identity, exile, and liberation across the Arab and African worlds. Now, the significance of these lies not merely in their fame, nor even in their technical brilliance, because they differ profoundly in language, culture, religion, politics, and aesthetic philosophy. Yet, despite these differences, the greatest poems share certain remarkable resemblances. All of them are rooted in the particulars of their own cultures, yet they speak beyond them. They emerge from history, yet they refuse to be imprisoned by the flow of history. They are shaped by their own languages, yet they somehow become translatable into the emotional vocabulary of humanity. This, perhaps, is a major ingredient of greatness: the ability of a poem to remain unmistakably local while becoming unmistakably universal. The great poem does not abandon its birthplace in order to speak to the world. It lives in the birthplace, but on the contrary, it speaks most powerfully to the world because it remains profoundly faithful to its own place, its own people, and its history. Its universality grows not from abstraction, but from the depth of its particularity. Now, I'm serving 7-course menu of poetic greatness. I will go quickly through this. There are 7 points that I've picked on as the menu of what I call a menu of poetic greatness. First, I speak of commitment to artistic excellence. A great poem exhibits unwavering commitment to aesthetic discipline. That is craft. Its symbols, metaphors, images, sounds, and structural patterns are never accidental, each contributing to the poem's total imaginative effect. Second is its commitment to its artistic excellence. The vitality of indirection is the second, that poetry rarely announces its meaning directly. There is certain indirection to the quality of the poem. It suggests, it evokes, implies, and invites new discovery through its new readers. The greatest poems reward repeated readings because they continually disclose new dimensions of significance. And third, what I call the simplicity without simplification of poetry. Great poetry often appears deceptively simple. That's when Shelley imagined the essential poem as one that is composed with the proper word in the proper place. Beneath that apparent clarity lies extraordinary precision and density of meaning. Simplicity in poetry is usually the product of artistic mastery, industry, rather than artistic limitation. Now, the fourth ingredient is what I refer to as rhythm and musical memory. Every memorable poem possesses an inner music, whether expressed through meter, cadence, repetition, pause, tonal variation, or rhyme schemes. Rhythm enables poetry to inhabit memory. We often remember a poem because we first remember music. And 5, what I call emotional authenticity. The emotions of a great poem are earned rather than manufactured. It avoids sentimentality while achieving emotional intensity. Readers recognize themselves within its emotional landscape. And 6, universality through particularity. Great poems often emerge from highly specific circumstances, yet they transcend them. They are local, they become global eventually. By remaining faithful to concrete human experience, they speak across cultures, generations, and historical periods. The greatness of a poem lies in this double achievement. That is, it remains rooted in the particularities of its own culture and historical moment, yet it speaks to the universal conditions of human existence. It honors the traditions that shaped it, even as it transforms those traditions for future generations. It is therefore, in the fullest sense, a great poem is therefore, in its fullest sense, a unique voice participating in a universal conversation. And the 7th menu is what I refer to as the transformative power of poetry. Ultimately, the greatness of a poem lies not only in its artistic beauty, but also in its capacity to change perception, to be courageous. It may inspire courage. It will challenge injustice. It will console grief, awaken empathy, or alter the way we understand ourselves and others. And quickly, I will focus on the work of Claude McKay if we must die, as an example, as the example of the greatness of a poem. This is a poem. It's one of the most compelling demonstrations of how a great poem can exceed its author's immediate intention and acquire an independent rhetorical life. It has all the 7 qualities that I've earlier made reference to: transformative power, simplicity, but not simplification. Mackay wrote this poem, a sonnet, in 1999 during the Red Summer. That was a period of racial terror in the United States, marked by anti-Black riots and lynchings. His immediate audience was African Americans facing systematic violence and humiliation. But the poem was an urgent call to dignity in the face of inevitable death, an uncompromising anthem of resistance. For me, the poem's greatness lies in its rhetorical perlocutionary force. It does not merely describe resistance, it performs it. The poem speaks its readers into courage, and in doing so, it transcends the historical circumstances of its composition to become a universal language of human dignity in the face of oppression. However, it's important to note the irony of this poem, and it is very profound. A poem written by a Jamaican-born Black writer protesting racial violence in the United States eventually became a source of inspiration for a British nation resisting fascism. Few examples better illustrate how poetry can exceed the intentions of its author. Mackay wrote this poem, and Winston Churchill appropriated it. It was at once a poem of Black resistance, a poem of anti-fascist courage, a poem of military endurance, and ultimately, a poem about the irreducible dignity of the human spirit. Now, I would like to note a couple of points, more like a takeaway, what I call coda. What should a great poem do? Or what does it look like? Or what does it sound like? Or what are the qualities? A great poem does not surrender its original meaning. It enlarges it. A great poem remains faithful to its first occasion while continually making itself available to new occasions. Its words become larger than their author, while even its audience becomes larger than its first readers. Its history becomes larger than the history that produced it. And its greatness is assured when, excuse me.
Thank you so much, Prof, for this inspiring keynote address. Okay. We've learned a lot.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me just conclude. In conclusion, I will just conclude now because I want to go through what makes a great poem. But in conclusion, greatness remains, eventually, greatness remains partly mysterious, but it becomes through persistent industry, inspiration, and artistry. The great poem continues to live because each generation finds itself reflected within it. In concluding, let me risk an aphorism. Bad poems are orphaned, good poems are admired, great poems are remembered. And the greatest poems are inherited through generations because they could become part of the language by which civilizations understand themselves. Great poetry survives through time. Thank you for the audience. Thank you.
Brilliant. Excellent. I gained a lot of new knowledge from this keynote address. Thank you so much, Professor. That was so illuminating. I think we now understand that poetry is about truth and craft. Outstanding. And do share the slides with us, Prof. We will email that PowerPoint presentation to all of these young poets because we have to study your knowledge.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Please stay around, Prof, because we have some young facilitators from all parts of Africa who will now give us an ingredient each. And we would like you to hang around, Prof, because we'll have a discussion at the end. And I think the young poets will really love your feedback. Our first facilitator is Ibrahim Yassin, an Egyptian poet born in 1987. He is currently residing in China, and he is formerly based in Johannesburg, South Africa. He is the author of 4 poetry collections in Arabic and English. Ibrahim Yassin is a nominee for the 21st UNESCO Sharjah Prize for Arab Culture and Intercultural Dialogue 2026. Greetings, Ibrahim. Over to you.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you, Prof, for this keynote. It's really mesmerizing. And it was a global poetic journey. So, Li Bai and Du Fo greet you from China. So, because we are short in time, we are going directly to explore together symbolism, making meaning. First, main idea. Oh, next one, Madam Anna. Yeah. Symbolism is not a decoration. It's a living force inside the poem. It grows, transforms, and creates meaning. It becomes alive when it finds its echo inside the poem. Next one, please. For the opening symbol, it's shown. The poem begins with the Chinese character, it's shown. It's showing meaning, group, crowd, collective. It appears foreign. This foreignness is intentional, actually. It reflects estrangement and displacement. It functions not just through its literal meaning, but as symbolic bridge between bamboo and African drums. Yes, next one. Symbolic connection. A symbol doesn't gain meaning alone. It becomes meaningful through interaction with other symbols. Later in the poem, the magic of African drums. Actually, the African drums, for me, I just make a note here. I got it from South Africa because we are in Egypt. Don't have the African drums in our culture. We're still in Africa. We still have our own traditions, but I get that from South Africa. Drums symbolize collective memory, shared identity, culture heritage. Okay, next one, please. It's shown. Versus African drums. Both related to different culture. It's shown is related to China while African drums to the entire African continent. Different symbols and cultures, but still one meaning. Collective existence, shared memory. This is where symbolism becomes alive. Yeah, next one, please. Bamboo symbol. Bamboo symbolizes resilience, flexibility, survival through bending. But in the poem, it also represents the ancient poet. That's why I wrote, the poet who bent, not broke. Next one, please. Green symbol, renewal and rebirth. Green is a symbol of renewal and rebirth. It's born in the space between bamboo and African drums, in that tension, where two symbolic worlds interact. This green stands in contrast to autumn. And from that tension, the new poet is born. Autumn here is related to the Mid-Autumn Festival in China. The green creates a new human possibility. The poet is not passive. He creates meaning. He transforms memory into present experience. Yeah, next one. Conclusion. The symbols in the poem work as a unified system. They serve the process of creating a new poet. So they're gonna produce that new poet and a new human consciousness. This transformation culminates in the final line, thus the bamboo poet was bending unbroken. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Well done, Ibrahim, Yassin. We learned a lot about symbolism. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge. And Ibrahim, do leave your contact details in the chat so that people
Yes.
can follow you and know more
Sure.
about
Yes.
your poetry.
Yes, sure. Thank you so much. Yes. Yeah, I'll do it.
To the poets listening, if you have any questions for Ibrahim Yassin, please do put them in our chat and feel free to ask. Ibrahim is still here and he'll answer your questions. Symbolism is very important in poetry because this is how you make meaning. This is how you bring out different layers. Remember what the Prof said, that a poem should not be one-dimensional. A poem should have depth, and you achieve that through symbolism. Our next masterclass is on Africanization, and our facilitator is Victoria Kerubo from Kenya. Her work appears in the Kalahari Review, Writer Space Africa, Afro Critic, and elsewhere. Victoria, we are ready for you. Over to you, Victoria.
Hello, can you hear me? Okay. Okay, my name is Victoria Kerubo. As mentioned, I'm from Nairobi, Kenya, and I will be taking you through the topic that is Africanization of poetry. By any chance, is the presentation up?
Victoria, please get started. I think the slides are slow due to network.
Okay. Oh, okay. So the first thing we need to or we're starting, we need to address is what is African poetry, right? Because Africanization implies that there is a process, there is a process going on where poetry, if we are to detach the roots of the word Africanization, poetry is sort of made African. So first, we need to understand what African poetry is. So African poetry is generally treated or regarded as a literary art form that has evolved from deep oral traditions into various written forms. So the first thing that we need to understand is that its origins are very oral, and over time, through the influence of colonialism, it's morphed into being expressed in a written format. So the key elements of African poetry are repetition of words or phrases, where, for example, if you're writing a poem, let's say it's an elegy or you're trying to express, let's say, someone in your ancestors, you will have use of chants where the same word is said repeatedly to emphasize that aspect. We have oral traditions where you find that in African societies, traditional African societies, we had myths, legends, and even allusion. So we find that these are aspects that still get incorporated such that you appeal to a past that is, let's say, ancestors. You appeal even the present seems to be influenced by different aspects of time. So not you don't, even in the present you don't exist in the present that time period itself. It's also known for elements such as simple language, which is and conversational language, which I will expound on later. Symbolism, as mentioned by the previous facilitator, and it often addresses the audience directly without cutting through corners, and that is also tied to the nature of how African societies express themselves through language. Next slide, please. So what is you need to understand the historical overview of how African poetry has evolved over time. So it can be broken down into 5 main periods. First, we have the pre-colonial era, that is generally before the 1880s. In this time period, African poetry was mainly transmitted orally through song. It involved even the combination of, let's say, instruments such as drums. It was not so literary, right? Then next, it morphed during the colonial era, where most African countries were colonized by European countries. This resulted in the import of new languages and new expressions, for example, introduction of writing. Therefore, poetry changed in that sense, where now it addressed the current affairs, which were loss of cultural identity, the resistance. This spilled over into the independence era, where there was still that aspect of struggle. Also, the post-colonial era, where you have now countries which have gained independence, but still struggle with now evils such as corruption. Again, trying to grapple with identity, since this also resulted in societies being separated, where, for example, during the slave trade, previously the countries, sorry, some Africans were taken to different continents, different parts of the world. So this resulted in the mere identity of being African being split across geography. And now the current era, which is the modern era, where people are still trying to fuse all these aspects. Next slide, please. So how do you Africanize poetry? So various definitions have been presented. But the two main things you aim to achieve is to, one, decenter African worldviews and languages and values, and number two, decolonize colonial hierarchies. So those are two separate things that we can summarize what Africanizing poetry means. And in this case, we are looking at Africa as a historical past where Africa initially may have been regarded as a single continent with a certain group of people comprising of different tribes, but now the definition expands where we have Africans in the diaspora, Africans in the Caribbean, in European countries. We have to encompass that. We have the view of Africa as an ideal where, again, from a different lens, perhaps a Western lens, it may contain romanticizations of the realities of Africa without addressing the needs of the people, which is the third definition of Africa as a real place with its own people and history. Next slide, please. So, therefore, Africanization of poetry can be tackled through analyzing its conflicts, right? And I present three main conflicts, which are one, linguistic, or the conflict of language, where, as I've mentioned, Africa initially, even from the beginning, had diverse tribes, with different languages, and this diversity was expanded by colonialism, where new languages were introduced. So, how, as a poet, can you tackle African or apply Africanization through this lens? You can decide to directly use indigenous languages in your poetry. For example, if you're from Kenya, there's the Kikuyu tribes, there's 42, like there's so many tribes, there's 42 tribes in Kenya. So those are 42 different languages that a poem can be written in. You can blend these African languages with European languages. So that's the first way you can Africanize poetry. The second is through the lens of the conflict of space, where Africa can be defined by the geographical space occupied, such that you say that Africa is everyone contained within the continent. But due to, again, the nature of the evolution of history, we have Africa, the definition of Africa expanding. So therefore, we have different perspectives. You can write from the perspective of an African in the diaspora, that's maybe a European country, an African in the Caribbean, again, an African living in the African continent. That provides room for different perspectives in writing. The third way you can approach it is through the conflict of time. Again, you cannot detach the concept of Africanization of poetry from history itself. So that means there's a rich thematic, the thematic content is rich. You can address what it was like probably for someone who lived during the pre-colonial period from that perspective, what it is like to live with the aftermath of that. You can approach how a community deals with that, or how one deals with that individually. There's so many different ways you can approach that thematically. Stylistically, it means that you can try to weave the different, for example, oral traditions with modern day forms. For example, spoken word poetry that is currently used as a way of transmitting poetry orally, and thus fusing the past and the present. So all these are various angles we can look at. Next slide, please. So I'll use my poem as a case study. My poem is called Your Coffee Smells Like Blood. And you can have a look at the poem, but essentially the poem applies Africanization through different ways, such as centering African history and the lived experience through the perspective of an African narrator living far away from home. So it's written from the perspective of someone who's existing within colonial, post-colonial Africa. And Africanization is applied through ways such as repetition. In the first stanza, you see I, and then the second one, I don't ask questions in the cafe. I sleep, I nod, I like it that way. So that's very repetitive. We have use of native words such as calling, instead of saying of my mother, you say of mama, of baba, because that's what you call them, that's what you naturally call them. We have the use of metaphor where the mug is compared to an aching back. The sound of the shirt tearing is echoed through when the sound of the coffee pouring. We have the coffee being used as the main image and evoking the question of whether something violent can be born of something sweet. For example, coffee being, and again, you can weave different meanings. For example, coffee is generally an import into most African countries. Therefore, you create layers where someone can interpret words differently, can ask themselves why coffee, why not what beverages are, you even ask yourself what beverages were consumed by Africans during different time periods, again, in different places. So it ends up making the language rich stylistically, form-wise, and thematically. Next slide. In conclusion, Africanization of poetry places African voices, culture, and experiences at the center of literary expression. And this is achieved through the elements I mentioned previously. It can be traced through different eras. As mentioned during the keynote speech, numerous writers have explored or have applied, or rather have written African poetry in a way that feels authentic to the African experience. And this is even challenging. For example, if you are to look at Wasan Shire's poetry and compare that to the text poetry, the texture and flavors are different, such that you have different perspectives, and yet they still point to north, where they still feel authentic to the African experiences. There's been various criticisms towards African poetry in general, but it is important to understand that African poetry exists within a socio-cultural, economic, and political context. So even as you're writing, we need to understand what is the economic reality of the person you're writing about. Are they well off? Are they struggling? What's the political context? Is there war? Is there peace? You need to tell us all these things with as few words as possible, because again, it's poetry, and we need to interpret everything in very many ways. With that, I'll conclude my presentation on Africanizing poetry, but first I'd like to get questions if there's any. If there's none, thank you for the time.
Thank you so much, Victoria. Yes, we do have a lot of questions, and we're writing our questions in the chat. Victoria, please do share your details so that people can follow you. You seem to be a very knowledgeable and creative poet. We want to be parts of that energy. Thank you so much, Victoria. That was wonderful. I think, just tying it with what the professor had said, if poetry is about expressing truth with craft, we have to express our African truth. Here you are, a young writer in an African country. What is your true condition? What is the true situation? Let's write those poems. Now we're going to go deeper into craft. What's his craft? Most of us know witchcraft, but that's not what we're talking about in poetry. We're talking about being a crafts person, being technically aware of what we're doing. Our next facilitator, Phillip Shagant from Malawi, will introduce us to a highly technical aspect of poetry, which is contrast, juxtaposition. As we tell the truth, we have to do it in a nuanced way. Over to you, Paul.
Thank you. I hope I'm audible enough. So just waiting for the presentation and a brief introduction. My name is Phillip Shagant from Malawi, a poet and a student at Malawi University of Science and Technology, MAST. Today I'll present the poem titled Ingredients of a Great Poem, whereby I'll be exploring the tension through mentality and juxtaposition. So going to the next slide. Why tension matters. So we've been exploring over and over. Before discussing mentality and juxtaposition, we must first understand tension. Tension is just a force that keeps readers emotionally and intellectually engaged. So it's something that can be expressed as a feeling which is important at some stake. When readers experience tension, they begin asking questions, judging characters, and anticipating outcomes. This is why tensions makes poetry memorable. It just encourages reflection and it creates some of the curiosity. Next slide. What happens if a poem lacks tensions? So without tensions, even a beautiful written poetry can become ordinary. It's just like a predictable thing, the flow that from this we go to this, from this we go to this. Something with just a weak emotion, easy to forget, something that can't create something like a memorable thing. For example, we are saying that, imagine a poem that simply says, the sun rose, birds sang, and I was happy. It may be pleasant, but there's no conflict, nothing challenging the reader. Such a poem is just an easy to forget. The next slide. How juxtaposition creates tension. What happens? Juxtaposition places coordination like two sides that creates tensions. It's through placing contrasting ideas side by side. For example, in my poem called Nkanabasa, we'll find words that are contrasting each other. Free education and early marriages. The speaker questions why someone would reject education in favor of marriage before becoming independent. In the same poem, you'll find like hardworking friends are contrasted with the lazy young man. While others are in the fields, he does nothing. Whatever he do is just wandering around without doing anything, that if he gets into marriage, will point out that here is the thing he used to do. The lastly, he wants a wife, yet he has no house. His dreams are contrasting with his reality. So this contrast forces readers to think and judge the character choice. That's how juxtaposition creates. So to unsentimentality, how unsentimentality creates tension. This is another powerful ingredient. This means telling the truth without softening it. Inside my poem, you may read, like a dog you move. The poet does not try to protect the character's feeling. The language is deliberately harsh. No hurt you even warn. Will you manage to take care of that wife? These blunt statements create discomfort. That discomfort is a tension because the readers being reflecting on responsibility, laziness, and the consequences of poor decision. So by doing that, we are portraying how unsentimentality creates tension, like telling truth openly without hiding things. So why tension is essential? We are saying, so why tension is an essential ingredient of poetry? First, tension keeps readers interested. Secondly, it encourages interpretation rather than giving simple answers. Thirdly, it allows poems to speak about real human struggles. For example, in my poem Kanabasa, which is translated as Lesman, tension comes from the conflict between the dreams and reality, youth and responsibility, laziness and hard work. As you go through the poem, you find that. So tension is very important. In conclusion, I would say, to conclude, a great poem is not only beautiful because of words, it is memorable because it creates tension. As juxtaposition creates tension by placing opposite side ideas, and sentimentality creates tension by presenting truth, honestly, and without emotional exaggerations. Together, these techniques invite readers to think, question, and remember the poem long after they have finished reading. Thank you for your attention. I welcome your questions and comments.
That was so wonderful.
Thank you so much.
Well done. So I saw a hand up from Doreen Mwenda. Did you have a question for Paul, since we do have some time? Doreen Mwenda, you can unmute Doreen to ask your question. Okay, so that was just an accident. But I can ask a question. What exactly is juxtaposition, Paul? Yes, we understand that to create that tension, we need juxtaposition, but what is it really? Please unmute, Paul, so that we can hear the response. Hello, Paul, are you still there? Are you able to unmute?
Yes, so it has been done. I'm saying juxtaposition, it's like creating something that is contrary to what you're exactly doing. I can put it in a way like you are in the Bible, like what David did to Goliath is contrary to what people were expecting from David because of the height of him. So that's how, in short, juxtaposition is portraying in this poem. Like this young man, instead of having a heart of loving education, he decides of going into the villages and whatever just to find marriage. So by doing that, we are seeing that the boy is doing contrary to what we are expecting as society. That's how juxtaposition can be explained.
I like that. Very unique, Paul. So for me, what you've said actually is a great way of explaining juxtaposition. That David and Goliath example, because David is small, you think he'll be weak, but David shows great strength even in the face of a giant. I look at it this way as well. A lot of the times when emerging poets are writing, they focus only on one side of things. A poem can just be full of sweetness. And because the whole poem is so sweet, it doesn't feel authentic, because life isn't 100% sweet. In life, we also have bitterness. We have sourness. Things are spicy. So juxtaposition is to show the other flavors. That's another way of looking at it. But I think Paul did it so well. And Paul, do leave your details in the chat so that people can contact you, follow you, and stay connected. Our next presentation is on something that is so vital. If as a poet, you understand the elements of matter, you won't struggle to express yourself in a poetic way. Remember what Prof said, that if poetry was only about truth, then even journalists would be poets. Because when you open a newspaper, it's full of truth, full of facts, right? But as poets, we're not doing journalism. We're not doing hard science. We are doing poetic imagination. And Goska, Matala, will give us insights into what that is. Greetings, Goska. You're most welcome.
Thank you so much, host, and a very good afternoon to everybody. My name is Goska Matala. I am currently living in the Kingdom of Eswatini. It is a beautiful country on the south of Africa. And I am originally from the Democratic Republic of Congo, so I speak quite a number of languages. So I am very, very excited to be able to facilitate this masterclass on the elements of matter. So the elements of matter that I'm going to be focusing on are fire, water, air, earth, and space. I'll say that again: fire, water, air, earth, and space. So why exactly are we focusing on these elements? We're focusing on these elements because they're very important when writing a poem, and they help to add a lot of emotion. So I am also the author of a poem called A Silent African Sun, and I will be using my poem as an example for most of these elements of matter. I was actually quite fortunate that my poem happens to touch all the elements of matter that I'm going to be touching on today. So without wasting time, could we please have the next slide? So how do poets use the elements of matter? So like I mentioned, that these elements of matter are not just matter, they actually matter. And why they matter is because they are the engine of a poem. They help drive the poem. And how exactly do they do that? So the first thing is these elements are anchors in a poem. What do I mean by anchors? By anchors, I mean they actually give a poem the shape that it needs, the shape of intangible emotions. For instance, you cannot feel, you cannot see, or you cannot touch sadness. It's an intangible emotion, but you can actually use an element like water to express your sadness. And secondly, how do poets use these matters? They use it to transition from one state to another. For example, if you're transitioning from drought to rain, or from a period of sadness to a period of joy, we would have to use this kind of matter to express how we are feeling. And then also, we use the elements of matter to be able to contain events. And what do I mean by containing events? I mean exactly that. Where exactly is your poem situated? Where is it happening? In what period of your life? Where exactly is it happening? The location. So that helps to contain events. And lastly, it also helps and allows the reader, which is you wonderful people, to be able to touch the poet's experience, for you to be able to feel what I'm feeling. Because most of the time, especially for myself, when I write a poem, man, I'm writing the poem from an emotion that I'm experiencing. Either it's sadness, either it's confusion, either it's joy. So for me to make you experience what I'm experiencing, I have to use the elements. Could I please have the next slide? So now we are moving on to the very first element, which is fire. So the first thing that comes to your mind when you hear fire is heat, destruction, intense emotion. Is that right? That is exactly what fire brings to a poem. So what are fire words in a poem? So fire words are words that represent heat, destruction, transformation, or intense emotion. And what is their function? Their function is to inject urgency and intensity into the poem. So most of the time, you would find in a poem, let's say someone is writing a poem about a very traumatic experience that they experienced in their life, right? They would use a fire word at the beginning of the poem to express their trauma or their pain. So examples of these words are words like sun, spear, heat, flame, spark, burn, blaze. All these words give you the emotions of urgency, of intense emotion. And I'm not sure if you guys are able to see in the slides, but one of the examples from my poem, if you get a chance to read it, is following the sun, following the heat of the sun. And the heart is pierced by a sharp spear. So when you hear these words, you feel that, oh my word, there's an intense emotion. The poet is expressing the heat of the sun, not just saying it was very hot, but we are expressing the sun and the intensity of the heat, which also impacts the poet's emotion. Could I please have the next slide? Now we are moving on to water words. Now, what are water words? Of course, water, when you just hear the word water, the first thing that comes to your mind is cleansing, it's survival, it's flow. So water words help relate to fluid. So anything that has to do with fluid, with flow, it is a water word. And these words, they bring back the necessity or the reason of living, the reason of surviving. So mostly, when you will see a water word in a poem, it will be used as a way to bring back hope, to bring back revival, to bring back a miracle, or just the hope of something good happening. So their function is to act as symbols for restoration, like I just said, for purification, or the literal struggle for life. So examples of these words are waterfall, water, tear. Anything that involves a fluid can fall under a water word. And what's very interesting about the water words is that even the aquatic animals fall under water words. And aquatic animals are animals like fish, like hippo, like duck. Anything that lives in the water qualifies to be a water word. So can you see how beautiful poetry is? You can express yourself as an aquatic animal. You see an example that I used was hot tears begin to flow and cleanse. And then a miracle of a waterfall. So as I mentioned, it's bringing hope, it's bringing purification, and it's bringing cleansing. Brilliant. Now, may we please move on to the third element, next slide, which is air words. So air words, you know what air is. We have air all around us. Even right now, we all have air around us. And air words, they help to describe the intangible atmosphere surrounding the subject. And the most interesting thing about air words is that air is something that is mostly ignored. Do you know why? It's because it's all over us to the point that it becomes just too obvious. And sometimes people ignore the fact that air is very important in poetry. And as much as it is in abundance, it is very important in poetry. So the function of using air words is they represent the spirit that is unseen, the unseen environment, the unseen spirit that is often overlooked. So examples of air words include things like mist, wind, breath, shadow, breeze, everything that just involves air in it. Those are air words. And like I mentioned before, remember when we just looked at the water words, we saw that aquatic animals make water words. So even in air words, we find out that aerial animals are animals that fly in the air, like birds, like eagles. Anything that's in the air becomes an air word. So even these aerial animals fall and qualify as air words. And an example in my own poem is in the clearing beyond the mist. So my poem, A Silent African Sound, is a poem that just focuses on a person who's stranded in the middle of a desert. And that whole experience, it just shows how much that drought affected the person. So here, when I say in the clearing beyond the mist, this is when this particular person begins to see that there is hope of water. There is hope of water in this dry desert. And that is in the air, which is overlooked. That means even in an overlooked space, you can use it to your advantage as a poet and make that overlooked space have meaning. So brilliant. I love this one. Maybe please move on to the next slide, which is earthwords. So earthwords are just things like sand, ground. And you know, the funny thing or the most interesting thing about earthwords, they help to signify stability and instability at the very same time. And I'm going to show you that in just a second. So earthwords connect to the poem, to the physical landscape, which is the ground. So it connects the person to the physical landscape, which is the ground, or the left of it thereof. So what do I mean by this? So we have soils that are rich, that are fertile, that give us what? Grass, that give us crops, that give us nutrients. And then we also have the other side of the coin, which is dry ground, which is barren ground. Just like my poem, where we have a desert, it's dry, barren, harsh ground. So when we see earthwords being used in a poem, we need to pay very much attention, because it could be signifying stability, or it could be signifying instability, which is drought, which is decay, which is, you know, lack of life. So the function of these words, they ground the poem in reality. They provide a physical sense of weight. Like I said, they provide stability or instability. So examples of these words include soil, you know, tree, mud. And just like the previous ones we saw that in air words we had aerial animals, in water words we had what? Aquatic animals. Even here in earth words, we also have land animals or terrestrial animals. And these also form examples of earth words. So can you see how beautiful poetry is? There is always something for you to use. Therefore, it is impossible, I believe that it's impossible to create a boring poem if you use all the elements of matter, because they're readily available for us all, right? So examples of this include, from my poem, swollen with the mud, kneel before a mound of earth. All of this show what? That there is earth involved. And the last one is, I'm not sure if I'm still audible. The last one is spatial words. Am I still audible? Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay. Let me continue. So the last element is spatial words. So spatial words, they have to deal, and for the first time when I had spatial words, I thought that spatial meant since there was a space, it meant a void. But no, spatial words in poetry are never a void. So spatial words refer to a specific place that contain people, objects, or what? History. So spatial or space is used to define the stage where human drama occurs. For instance, words that give examples of space in poems include classroom, a house, basement, a box, a city. Anything that has been given a boundary qualifies to be a spatial word or a space. And the interesting thing in my poem is my poem was about someone who went through a desert phase, a literal desert phase. And in that phase, the person had not eaten because this desert was remote and there was no food. And in my poem, the person's stomach became a spatial word, because in that moment, the stomach was given the properties of a space, because in that moment, the person's survival became internal. It became on the stomach, the hollow space in the stomach. So in that moment, that was treating the body as a container or an experience. So even a body, a container, can become a spatial word, which shows that you are not limited to an actual physical structure, but anything that is given what a boundary becomes what a container of experience, hence becomes a spatial word. And to conclude my presentation, why exactly should we use these elements of matter? Why do they matter? Well, they matter because firstly, they help ground your senses. They help ground your senses. They help the person who is reading the poem to understand. It helps the reader to be able to touch, to smell, to see, to experience all of this, even without being there where the actual thing may have occurred. Because some poems are based on true stories. You may have not been at the true event, but through this you are able to experience it. And secondly, it helps with the emotional weight. It helps the reader to experience every emotion that the poet felt, that the poet went through. And lastly, it helps create a shared language. By paying attention to all these material words, all these words, the poet and the reader now have a shared language. For example, if the poet were to write a poem and just say, I am sad, what are you going to express, or what are you as the reader going to understand from I am sad? I am sad is just a normal word. But if you say, I am a dried, barren spring, just look at that, a dried, barren spring. And by that you feel that there is barrenness in this water word, which is spring. And that helps you as the reader to really understand that, you know what, this poet is not just sad, this poet is going through the most. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. It was a pleasure to facilitate this masterclass. And if you have any questions, please feel free to shoot them in the chat, and I'll try my best to pay attention to all of them, and as well as share my details. Thank you so much. Back to you, host.
Well done, Goska. That was very insightful. And I love how clearly, simply, and elegantly you took us through the elemental words. Poets, it really is as simple as that. A poem must have these words. A poem must have words from the material world. What Goska was saying at the end is, in poetry, we don't express ourselves with abstractions. You know, what are abstractions? Things like sadness, happiness, potential, innovation. We don't want to use those words in poetry. In a poem, you want to use flame, breeze, rose, house, room. In poetry, we want tangible things to express our emotions. And I love how you did it, Goska. So do get in touch with Goska, follow her. She's sharing her details right now in the chat. If you have any questions for her, feel free. And you can see how confidently she answered. I feel if you need a mentor, I think stick to someone like Goska. You'll go far in your poetry. Now, I feel that we know that we're not literally talking about fire. If I'm angry, and I can say that, you know, my heart is an ember right now, that's a metaphor, isn't it? Because it's not literally an ember. So to take us a bit deeper into what metaphor is, we have a great artist from the Republic of South Africa, Bafana. Greetings, Bafana. Please
Greetings,
help us
everyone.
understand metaphor.
I hope that I'm audible.
Yes, you are, Bafana.
All right. Greetings to everyone. I would like to thank everyone for taking their time and grace us in this workshop. I'd also like to take the time to thank the Pan-African Writers Association for this opportunity to present a masterclass on metaphor as one of the ingredients of how to make a great poem. I like to explain to people that we grow as we go. I hope this has been a safe one, an accommodative environment to everyone, and will grow from both parties, those who are presenting and those who are attending and noting. So with that being said, next slide, please. We are here to talk about ingredients of poetry. As we like to say in today's languages, we are cooking. So these are the tools that we need to cook our literary works or some of the stuff we write to make our work interesting and to spark the emotion and paint a vivid picture to whoever is reading. So these are the very, very fundamental tools a writer needs to infuse them in their work. Next slide, please. The tools can vary. Some can be structural tools in terms of what is the structure of the poem. Some focus more on figures of speech, and I am one of those, and I focus on a metaphor. As we know, that is one of the figure of speech with the object to another. Next slide, please. Here I'm explaining that in my poem, I chose to use an extended metaphor, and I'll explain why I chose an extended metaphor. Next slide, please. Next one also, please. Thank you so much. So my poem is called Komo. Komo translates to a cow. The cow in my poem is being compared to the state of our continent. The burning of the cow is how Africa is being exploited and corrupted throughout these years. So here the object, the cow, it burns and there's no water to kill that fire, because we can literally say there's shortages of water in the continent, but at the same time, this is the result of lazy and poor service delivery from certain political leadership. Next slide, please. Yes, thank you. Like I have said, that Homo is being an object that is compared in this poem. So I'm comparing Homo to Africa, motherland. So Homo in Sesotho, Setswana, and Sepedi languages that we have in South Africa, it means a cow. So here I'm comparing that to that object. Now, as an extended metaphor, I'm bringing this to everyone, because with metaphor, with poetry, we are trying to imagine the impossible. Now imagine a burning cow. What is that representing? As a motherland, what does that represent? The cow as a source of wealth. When it burns, what does that represent to you? So a cow, what does it represent to the traditional point of view of African people? So with an extended metaphor, I'm trying to find meanings within the cow. As a cow, different parts, it has different attributes. All of them, can they make meaning? Because in my poem, I want to touch in different and complex topics that affect the continent, be it corruption, being the black on black violence, being the unity that is lacking. Next slide, please. Next one. Here I'm just showing the cow, and I'm going to explain this picture in the later slide. Thank you. So in my poem, Homo, I also wish people will get a chance to read as part of the ontology one of the Pan-African Writers Association. I establish Homo, the cow, as this very, very important entity. I call it Melechadi Chaba. Melechadi Chaba is a word in our language, Sepedi, that means the mother of the nation or the bearer of the nation. So this image is so vast and literally explains the beautiful mountains and the valleys and the rivers that we find in South Africa or in Africa at large. So now that also has a metaphorical layer in it, because this so given vast with rivers and water continent, it still has what you call less supply of water based on the corruption that is happening within the continent. And then there's line in the poem where I get to talk about the youth. So now I'm touching on the generational trauma that is affecting youth. Now the cow becomes this object that is a victim of external and systematic forces, and it bends while the community stands there. Next slide, please. There's a line in my poem, Homo, where I say, Homo kholo pelo ntso e bona thaka leka leka a ka go thabela ganona le mo tlhabaka le naka. That would mean a peer sees the other one trying to push and hustle. They will say that I'm happy for you, but deep down they know that they are lying and they will going to stab them in their back in the long run. So this is where at the end of the poem, the cow is being described as having an evil heart, and now it stabs the peer. So here, the cow, we're extending this metaphor of the cow has now given birth, or the cow has descendants, but these descendants, instead of continuing with the ways of life of the great cow, they're influenced by this systematic corruption, they're influenced by these ideologies that were being brought throughout these years, and now they are having like violence and this jealousy happening amongst communities. So that affect the motherland. So the very tool of defense the cow has, being the horn, it is now used as a weapon against its own people. Next slide, please. Like I have explained that in the final stanza, the poem touches more on the black on black violences that are happening, or if I would pose it, if two bulls or two cows are in a crowd battling out, it'll always be the ground or the surroundings that suffer. So now in this continent, when people that are supposed to be unifying the continent, battling it out, it'll always be the continent that suffer. And with that, me using the horn of a cow, I was trying to point out, not to go in depth, but certain activities that have been happening in the countries. One that I can note that is recent to us is the 30 June March and March that we had in our country, South Africa, that had divided the continent. Others agree with the March and March, others are not with the March and March. So with that line where I'm saying other that's the part where we are talking and focusing on the specifics and the poisons. Next slide, please. Here is the cow out and the horns going at each other. Next slide, please. So, source of creation, fertility, motherhood, and nourishment. Me, in my poem, writing it this way, I'm trying to evoke and compare the cow through poetry and summon the primordial mother who sustains and feeds and births great nations. I am saying this like that. I'll explain the picture that appeared on the slide earlier of a cow and a woman symbolized with horns and a sun disk. That is one of our African creation mythologies with the great mother Ma. In others is called Nenabano Ma, in others is Mahat, in others is Mahato. That's the great eyes with a cow and great horns, and she's a symbol of justice, truth, and cosmic balance. And that's what we need as a continent, that unity, that truth, that unified, that is lacking. It's lost because we are hating the motherland so much in many various factors. So this is the core ingredient of our spiritual healthy society, and the continent needs that in the modern times. Next slide. Like I've explained, Melechadi Chaba as the bearer of nations. Homo, if it bends, this is our source of life, wealth, and spiritual connection. If it bends, this means the very foundation of society is in crisis. a burning car in many explanation would represent many things, but one of the things that it represents an ultimate tragedy. It represents the destruction of a heritage, the disruption of ancestral peace. Next slide. Next slide, please. I didn't use home, knowing that it has different parts in the body, that I can use a horn to come up with this metaphor to tackle this kind of I can use the cow because it produces, and I used it because it will be relatable throughout Africa. Because throughout Africa, the cow has been one of the most revered animals. It is used in our ceremonies. It is used in different ceremonies, can be weddings, cows, celebrations of different sorts. Cows usually used. Cows are used as a source of food. Cows represent a source of wealth if you have abundance in them. And we know of the story of the Maasai people who speak of God giving them cattle as a direct link between heaven and earth. So a cow has been a revered animal in Africa during like lobola negotiation before this marriage. There's cows that will be paid to the family of the wife. So the cow, me choosing it, I knew that it has a sense of relatability. And the previous facilitator mentions the fire language. Me, in my poem, I use Homoyaswa. In Sepedi, that's a sacred line, and most of cases is used in boys when they come from initiation school, in their transformation from boy to manhood. Before they would recite their or their praises, they would start by saying Homoyaswa. And in me using Homo, comparing it to the motherland, I knew that it will have a sense of relatability in different cultures, languages that exist within the continent. Next slide, please. So in closing, I would like to say that poems are words, and words cannot just change or build physical culture, but they can spark ideas and thoughts to someone who's out there to come up with ideas that these poets, or as writers, we are mentioning that we need to see as changes. So someone out there can be there. So with my topic, it was metaphor, masterclass, imagining the impossible. And in my poem, I use home to imagine the impossible. Imagine a cow as it bends and what that means. In my poem, I say, let us use poetry to continue to imagine the impossible. And in my poem, I did exactly that. We can see how a simple and everyday symbol, a cow, a living entity, an animal in our culture, can carry so much weight, so much meaning for the entire continent and their struggles and their hopes. So I used an extended metaphor to show that when our heritage bends, our future bends with it, and it is up to us to wake up and fix it. Thank you so much. Next slide, please. And that is me, Bafana. Number one, Bafana. I'd like to appreciate people for their time.
Thank you so much, Bafana. I have a question for you.
Yes.
I love that you're using a cow. As Goska just told us, a cow is an earth element, a land element. Now, from, Bafana, when you were speaking, I was feeling a bit like, okay, so what's really the difference between a symbol and a metaphor? Because sometimes when you're speaking, I felt you were speaking symbolically. I didn't feel you were speaking metaphorically. Can you help us understand what's the difference between a symbol and a metaphor?
Like I've explained that's a great question, by the way, thank you so much. Like I've explained that with a metaphor, we are comparing an object as one thing, we are comparing it to another. And in my poem, I used a cow as an object being compared to the motherland, the land of Africa. And I use an extended metaphor because in my poem, it is so complex that it touches on different topics like the corruption, the violence and the anger and other individual issues that are happening within the continent. So I use specific parts of the object that I'm comparing it to. What are the objects that I chose? I chose the horn to explain or represent the betrayal of things that are happening. I chose the cow as an animal that produces source of food and can produce a source of wealth, and motherland, as we know, it's a mother as a source or a sign of fertility, a sign of nourishment and creation. And a cow is one of the animals that has those qualities. I could have used any other animal, maybe a lion, but a lion symbolizes wilderness and danger and other things. But with cow, there's more that I can use. So with symbolism, I wouldn't want to delve much in that since my focus was on metaphor, but I would say with symbolism, I would be rooted in completely focusing in a cow as a symbol and not other nitty-gritties like a horn, the source of producing wealth or food, or it as a burning thing. So symbolism, I would say, restrict an object to only be a symbol of whatever that it symbolizes, and a metaphor compares.
You've spoken very well, Bafana, and I do agree with you. A symbol simply means the deeper meaning of an object. So we know that cows have deeper meanings. In my country, Zambia, a cow is a symbol of wealth. If you have cows, you're rich. But a metaphor, so I feel the metaphor is this page you've shown us here, where you say that the cow is the mother of the nations, the bearer of nations, because now you're being imaginative.
Yes.
You don't see that physically, but it's up there in the world of ideas. So I think that's the heart of metaphor, the imagination, the imaginary aspect that we put in reality. Thank you so much, Bafana.
Thank you so much.
You're a brilliant artist, and I encourage all of the young poets here, do follow Bafana. He's doing amazing things in South Africa on the stage. And I'm sure you heard from his presentation, he's got a heart for all Africans. So do share your details, Bafana, so that people can follow you.
I genuinely do have a beautiful heart for Africans. Thank you so much.
And feel free, poets, ask your questions. I'm sure you've got a question for Bafana about metaphor. Feel free to ask in the chats. We're now going to go into imagery, and we'll be led by a poet from South Sudan. He's quite prolific and acclaimed, so accomplished. I'm speaking of Marial Awendit. Greetings, Marial. Marial, you're still muted. If Marial is not able to unmute right now, I suggest that we can move on to our next facilitator from Botswana, who will take us into the soundscape of poetry. We've been focusing a lot on the images, isn't it, and the meanings. But now let's go into what Prof had said, that a poem is also about the rhythm. What makes it poetic is the way it sounds. We have Phodiso Modirwa, a poet from Botswana. She has achieved a lot. I'm so impressed by her publications. Just Google her, look her up. She's internationally recognized, published by the African Poetry Book Fund. She's amazing. Greetings, Phodiso.
Hello, hi everyone. Are we good? Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible. You're welcome.
Okay, that's great. I was trying to add my video here, but I see it's disabled. It's fine. I'm trying to share my screen.
I'm sharing for you. Please go ahead.
Oh, okay. In that case, as mentioned, my name is Phodiso Modirwa. I am a writer and a poet, and it is an honor for me to be here sharing a little bit of what I know about rhythm and poetry. As we may be aware, poetry differs from prose in this manner that prose is ordinary everyday writing in sentences and paragraphs, while poetry is artistic writing, which is structured in lines and stanzas, often using rhythm or rhyme. In poetry, we would say that the rhythm of poetry is the beat and the pace of it, or how it flows. It is also achieved by several things like repetition, and it can be created by a pattern of stressed and unstressed syllables in a sentence. We can think of it in this way. Okay, if you could just give me a second, because I have two screens on my end. Oh, okay, no, that's great. That's great. Thank you so much. We were here thinking of stressed and unstressed syllables. Normally, the stressed syllables are considered longer or louder syllables in a word. For example, if you have a word like parade, we understand that that's a word that has two syllables, but the one is softer and the other one is louder. So that is how we would be able to tell which one is stressed or which one is not. We can take an example from the famous Shakespeare line, "Shall I compare thee to a summer's day?" If everyone is able to see the screen, that I tried to break it down in the DA, the da-dum, da-dum, da-dum of a heartbeat. The DA in the small letters would be what? Or would be the softer syllables, and then the capitals would show the stressed syllable. I hope that makes sense. Sorry, but continuing on, one of the ways to improve rhythm in your poetry is writing in metrical foot. A meter is a pattern of stressed and unstressed parts of words that we just talked about. But the other thing that we can do is to utilize sound devices like alliteration, assonance, and consonants. We can also strive to vary sentence lengths in poetry. I know that we have like stanzas poetry, but we can also have prose poetry. Alternating lines between in prose can also just help with the flow of the poem, such that you have this short and punchy lines, and then you have the longer flowing ones that create a natural rise and fall while propelling the story forward. The other thing that I find to be helpful even for me is reading my poetry or my lines out loud. By the time that I think that I'm done editing, I find that reading out loud, you kind of are able to tell where you would like to pause and breathe, and where the reader might be pausing to breathe, which might be different from you. So then it'll be easier for you to tell, okay, maybe this is where I need to break the line. Maybe this is where I need to let the idea flow better instead of like abruptly cutting it through in the middle. Going back to writing in meter, I have to make this disclaimer as well. I am a poet who is self-taught. And so everything that I come across or that I try to experiment with in my writing, it is basically just me trying to find out information here and there. I'm saying this to say that I did not study Shakespeare in school. I didn't do literature at all, but I have been fascinated by educating myself especially in different things like poetic forms, formal poetic forms, and things like iambic pentameter. I'm saying this to say that I know for some people it might just sound like, oh, that's just something that we're pretty familiar with from high school. Well, for me, it still is something that's exciting. So yeah, this is why I included it on here, because it's something that I'm also trying to experiment with. Writing in iambic pentameter, this is a meter that is frequently used, and that, as I mentioned before, sounds like a heartbeat, sounds like the natural flow that we would use in communicating. An iamb is a foot of verse made up by an unstressed syllable followed by a stressed syllable. Like I gave that example before, like in parade, PA would be one syllable, raid would be another syllable. So parade, the first syllable sounds, it's shorter, it's softer, and then raid sounds longer and louder, which is how we determine that it is the stressed syllable. And then penta means 5. So a line of iambic pentameter would have 5 iambs, and in the end that means you would have 10 syllables per line if you're writing in iambic pentameter. I wanted to include this example so long as men can breathe or eyes can see. It's just a line that would, it's not really poetic. I mean, not to say it's not poetic, to say it sounds like something that you would just say to your friend, or like normal conversation. I was trying to put it on here to say this is how, I don't want to say simple, but this is almost how simple it is because it happens naturally. We speak or write in iambic pentameter, sometimes not being aware that that is what we are doing. I'd like to leave you with this exercise. I understand that everyone will be sent these presentations, so can I just skip the slide because you'll be able to just go through it and do the exercise. The next thing I want us to talk about is syntax and diction. This is the actual words chosen and how they are arranged, which dictates the physical ease of reading. If you could just give me a moment. Something happened on my screen. Oh, okay. Going back to sentence structure. This is the grammatical arrangement of words in a sentence, and it deals with independent and dependent clauses. I may have mixed up my slides here and there, please pardon me. But syllable count. Syllable count is the total number of uninterrupted vowel sounds in a word or line. A syllable is a unit of pronunciation that contains one vowel sound. To count them, we ignore silent vowel letters and concentrate on the pronounced vowel sounds. For example, in this sentence, I will never make the mistake again. This, if you count the syllables, you have 9 syllables on there because you are counting the sounds and not really the silent vowel sounds. I mean, the silent vowels you don't count. You only count the sounds, the vowel sounds. Continuing to syntax and diction, sentence structure. This is the grammatical arrangement of words in a sentence. It deals with independent and dependent clauses. A clause is a group of words with a subject and a verb. And then a subject would be who or what the sentence is about. And a predicate would be what the subject does or what happens to them. An independent clause stands alone as a complete sentence. For example, she brought the car, or she wrote a poem. And a dependent clause would be the not complete sentence, let's say, before you go, we can hear that there's still something that has to be fitted there for it to be a complete sentence. So that is what we would call a dependent clause. Moving on to sound devices, we have the rhyme, which can be internal or end rhymes. This is what creates a musical resolution. End rhymes happen at the end of the line, and it does not particularly require that the subsequent lines have a rhyming word. It can be that the last line rhymes with, the last word in the line rhymes with the third last word in the line. I hope that makes sense. And then this is an example, Dorothy Parker's interview. This is just a stanza from her poem showing end rhymes. Moving on to internal rhymes, these happen in the middle or inside the line as opposed to at the end. A single line can have internal rhyme with multiple words rhyming within it, or the rhyming words can occur across multiple lines at different points. For example, patience is not my finest trait. Having to wait has me in a state of agony. You can hear that it even brings about that beat in the flow of the lines. Still on sound devices, alliteration. This is the repeating of consonant sounds at the start of words to create a driving momentum. An example would be to alter another apron for Alison. The A there would be, or the A sound would be the consonant sound that is being repeated. And then we have assonance, which is where we repeat vowel sounds to smooth out or elongate phrases. For example, the seer weeps for trees and bees. The sustained sound there being the E sound, or the light is bright in the night. Again, the sustained sound being the vowel sound I. We also have consonants, which is where we repeat consonant sounds in close proximity at any point to add a percussive texture. And I included that line, which is just a very common consonants example. She sells seashells by the seashore. We also have what is called a refrain, which is a line or a phrase or a single word that is repeated periodically within a poem to build up drama or emphasis. In my poem, Hosanna Badam, the words Hosanna Bat keep on getting repeated at every so maybe like 4 lines, and that would be an example of a refrain. And I'd like to leave you with a writing prompt. You will see it when you are sent this presentation, but it's basically just writing one poem with 8 syllables or 10 per line, employing alliteration and assonance and internal rhyme. Thank you so much for being generous with your time, and thank you for this opportunity. I don't do this often, I don't take it lightly, and I appreciate everyone who has been presenting before me. I have really learned a lot. I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
And that was so well done, Phodiso. I have a question for you. If a poet would like to improve their rhythm, what are some things they can do? Because I feel that many aspects of rhythm are historical. For example, if we talk about iambic pentameter and end rhyme, there was a time for that. But if I want to succeed today, publishing my poems in the top journals today, but I want my poems to be rhythmic in the contemporary way, what should I do?
I'd like to think about this question more, and maybe if I have more answers, put them in the chat. But I think one of the other ways that we can do that is just by repetition. Because repeating, we don't repeat just for the sake of repeating. If the lines are already creative enough. If the poem is already written, finding parts of the poem to repeat to emphasize a particular message, or even to surprise yourself to see what the poem could be saying other than what you thought the line meant, could be another way to introduce rhythm or to improve upon rhythm in the poem. But I will think about this question and leave the answers.
Well said, Phodiso. Do leave your details in the chat. We would love to follow you. You're doing amazing work, really representing African poets on the international level. And we want to be just like you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
I'm learning a lot. Poets, don't take it for granted that we have such great figures as Phodiso. Follow her, contact her, ask for more of her knowledge. There's a lot that we can learn if we unify. Now, let's go back to meaning. The meaning in our poems. Symbols are very important, but it's not as easy as it looks. If you remember how I challenged Bafana, what's the difference between a metaphor and a symbol? It's because in poetry, many things look simple. Even a poem itself looks easy. But when you start asking questions, you will find that it's quite difficult. For example, what are the parts of a symbol? What is concreteness in a symbol? To clarify all of that, we have Joel, a poet from Nigeria, who will help us see another side of symbolism, because this is one of the elements of poetry that is mandatory. Your poem needs to be meaningful. Your poem must be concrete. Good evening, Joel. How are you?
I'm fine. Thank you. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, greetings, Joel. Very happy to have you here.
Thank you so much. Same.
The floor is yours. The slides
Okay,
are coming.
Okay, mom. My name is Joe Ikechukwu. I'm an 18-year-old writer and student from Nigeria. Well, I was recently published on the Book to Paper platform. So I'm pretty honored to facilitate this masterclass on symbols. Well, if I would, okay. There is something we need to understand about symbols that we'll find out on the next slide. Before I dive into this, there is in my story, my friend Sunday, he asked me a question when we were 10. And that act of, and I've been building an answer towards that since then. He asked me what is purpose. Then he died after while saving a child. So that building is what I want to share with you all. Let us read the poem. It says, black, white, blue, green, yet no colors. 1944 pressed khaki into my veins. 1967 drained the blue from the sky till the harmattan itself turned ash. Mountains mouth prayers to clouds, the echo falls dead. I plug the sun like ripe udara, split it open, juice runs gold down my wrist to light the path the world forgot. My tune holds the moon, presses it to ice against my chest. Cold fire licks my palm, where the coin melted. Time is flat ink on my tongue. I spit it out, still no light. Colors, borrow me your name. I've lost a word for mine. That particular line, colors, borrow me your name, I've lost the word for mine, was written when I was sitting down in a room all alone. But then I realized something, that this poem was not written for myself alone, but for everyone who have been through erasure and have something to remember about. Next slide, please. Then let's read a bit from this slide. It said, what is symbolism? As it says, a symbol is an object, image, or a word that carries meaning beyond itself. Its power does not come from textbooks, it comes from lived experiences, memory, culture, and emotion. Let me give you a bit of backstory. This image, I don't know if you could show the slide, Udara. In our African side, where I'm from, Nigeria, most precisely, in my village, I and my grandma, we used to have this Udara, African star apple. The juice normally runs down my wrist. But when I applied it to this particular poem, it transcends beyond being a fruit. It becomes a symbol in colors for the poem. It becomes a symbol for home. It becomes a symbol of survival, because that is what it's all about. That is what the symbol is talking about. So object symbolism are like the anchor. They are like the things that give meaning beyond itself, deeper meaning beyond the self. So this next slide says object, a tangible thing you can see. Yes, a tangible thing you can see, touch, and so on. Then what makes this slide is very important. So it says, what makes a symbol strong? Then we come into something called concreteness. Let's read a bit from the slide. It said the symbol must be something you can see, touch, taste, or feel. Abstract ideas need a body. For instance, let me give you this from the poem. It says, I don't know if you could remember a line from the poem which says, okay, let me give you the first abstract idea, then the second part. For instance, maybe someone says, the war was devastating. Yes, they are stating something, but there is no anchor. There is nothing to make it concrete. But imagine this. Until the whole Harmattan itself turned ash. That is something else. Sorry, 1967 drained the blue from the sky till the whole Harmattan itself turned ash. That is concreteness. What are the concrete things there? 1967. It talks about, okay, that is quite personal. It talks about the Nigerian Civil War. Drain the blue from the sky is a symbol. You're talking about the sky. You're talking about how drained the sky was. But all these things are actually to paint the bigger picture about the Nigerian Civil War. That is why concreteness in poetry is really, really vital. You must paint a picture of something that is weaponizing the show and don't tell. That is one thing about concreteness in poetry. So when your poem is concrete, definitely your readers will understand. Then you have the specificity, as I said. 1954 is specific. 1967 is specific. 1954 talks about the World War. The other one are specific. Melted coin are specific. But when you say loss is universal. Loss is common, is vague. No one can understand it without an anchor. Then together, they form a movement. Nouns hold the symbol. The symbol, for instance, the coin is the symbol, yes. But what it needs to become motion is the verb. The verb brings it to life, as we all know what verbs are. The verb brings it to life. So what makes a symbol really, really weak is when it's borrowed. It's when it's quite nebulous. It's when it doesn't has an anchor to it. Next slide, please. So that is it. Well, we have some couple of symbols here. Khaki. We are all familiar with the military uniform. So khaki in 1944 was worn by the Nigerian military to fight and all of that. So in a normal casual sense, it is a fabric made 100% out of cotton wool. So in this context, it is transformed into a symbol, or because it serves a particular purpose. Then we have the drained sky, as I said earlier. Drained sky talks about the devastation of the war, talks about the killings, the bloods, and all of that. That is what it caused. Even heaven was wounded, as is stated in the slide. So this is the common and what makes it symbolic. Then I talk about melted coins. Melted coin, it talks about identity, like when your identity is dissolved, maybe based on something that was monetary, high valued, but due to the war, it was dissolved. So something solid becomes shapeless, all because of the war. This is what symbol is all about. Then the order I said earlier, it talks about survival, it talks about home, and all of that. Then borrow me your name. That particular word sentence is a plea more devastating than a cry, because it talks about erasure. It talks about so many things. You see how noun and verbs create symbols. For instance, nouns, as I said earlier, are what hold a symbol. You cannot have a symbol without having a symbol. What I mean is, you can't have a bag where there is no where there is no bag. So that's it. Then, as I explained earlier, the khaki is the fabric, the uniform, the empire, sky, heaven, and cloud, witness, and all of that. Fruit, udara is the fruit, home, survivor. Coin is the identity, the value, the self. That is for the noun. These are the symbols. But when we want to transform that into something something movable, something in motion, then we are talking of the pressed. Then we are talking of the drained, the plugged, the spit, the melted, the borrow. These are why nouns and verbs cannot go apart. They must collide to each other in order to form a very strong symbol. Next slide, please. Yes. So I am here to say something. My question is, I'm not asking a question to get an answer, but I want you to feel what I felt when I wrote colors. What symbol, what memory, what coin, what fruit, or what is that thing that holds your memory? What is that thing that holds you? Something that defines you? That is your symbol. Now go and write. So I want to say that plank by plank, we do not reclaim our name at once, but we reclaim them one fruit, one coin, one color, one memory, and one symbol at a time. Keep writing, keep symbolizing, and keep building. Thank you.
Amazing. What an excellent and clear explanation of concreteness and symbols. Well done to Joel Ikechukwu, a great poet in Nigeria.
Thank you so much.
We have to thank you, Joel. What I love about your masterclass is that you took us into grammar. In a poem, we only have words, so you can't run away from grammar. You showed us something, Joel, that symbols are about nouns. You need a noun. If you remember, we've touched on a number of symbols in this masterclass. We even looked at the cow as being a symbol. Sometimes it's a metaphor, but it's also a symbol. That's a noun. So we do need those nouns. A poem must be dominantly nouns. Nouns are the most important parts of speech in poetry. And thank you for showing us that, Joel.
Thank you so much, Mom. Thank you for having me.
Joel, please do attend to the chat. Share your details so that people can follow you and get in touch. And
Okay,
thank
Mom, I
you
will.
for sharing. And thank you for sharing your knowledge. As poets, we have to keep strengthening each other.
Yes.
We have
Okay, Mom.
thank you. We have Marial here. Marial is now ready to take us into sensation. We've been talking about different parts of the poetic image. Now it's time to talk about the sensory aspects. What is sensation in poetry? Why should we be using the senses? Good evening, Marial. Marial, are you able to unmute? I see that Marial is still having challenges. So let's move on to another side of the elements. This time, we're going to look at the reason why you need to be using materials in your poems. And to take us very deep into this philosophical side of poetry, we have an amazing, outstanding poet from Uganda, Omadang Yowasi. Greetings, Omadang, you're welcome. Omadang, are you able to raise your hand if you're using a different name in this meeting room? I feel that Omadang is also having trouble connecting. Omadang, we can't see you in the meeting room. So we can move on to the next masterclass from Dionisio, Conjo, a poet from Mozambique. Dionisio? Good evening, Dionisio. Are you able to unmute?
Oh, good evening, everyone.
Greetings, you're audible. We can hear you.
Yes. My name is Dionisio. All right. My name is Dionisio Conjo. I'm from Mozambique. So today we will talk about Africanizing poetry. So, Madam, I can see the presentation.
It's coming on, just the slow network.
Hello?
Please carry on, Dionisio.
Hello?
We can hear you, Dionisio.
Hello? Oh, all right. So I can continue without it. All right. As I was saying, today I will speak about Africanizing poetry. All right. This presentation is about writing poetry from African perspective, using our own history, culture, language, and experience. Poetry is more than beautiful words. It is a way to expressing identity, memory, and the truth. So we must know how to explore or write as African. We must write stories with authenticity, with our realities, instead of copying for outsider. Why do African voice matter? For many years, Africa was described by outside, and today African poets
Dionisio? I think Dionisio has lost connection, unfortunately. And he's completely gone offline. So I see Marial is back. Marial, are you able to unmute now? Yes, Mr. Marial, we do see you in the chat, but are you able to unmute to speak to us? Try unmuting, Mr. Marial. If Mr. Marial is not able to get on, we can have Omadang. Omadang, do try unmuting. We're ready for you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening. Thank you so much for being here, Omadang. We're excited to hear from you, to get your perspective on a very difficult topic in poetry. It's difficult because it's philosophical, the material imagination. The floor is yours, Omadang.
Thank you so much. Briefly, my name is Omadang Yowasi, a Ugandan poet, pope, and author. Today, I want to take the class on material imagination, and that is how poets use the 5 elements of fire, air, water, earth, and space. We all grew up with these elements. We cook with fire, we farm with water, we farm on earth, while we feel the wind on our skin. We live in houses with doors and windows as well. Poets take these everyday things and turn them into meaning. So my goal today is to show you how these 5 elements create mood, movement, and meaning in poetry. Next slide, please.
Yes, go ahead, Omadang.
All right. Let's start with fire. Fire imagery, these are images of flames, heat, sparks, anger, ash, burning, and so many others. Fire transforms, burns things down, but also refines them. Think about this flame. Pressure makes diamonds. Realize pressure is fire. So to make diamonds, there must be fire. The intensity of fire also creates passion, anger, love, revolution. It also raises the temperature in a poem. Fire also causes destruction and rebirth. Just imagine after a wildfire or a bushfire, the ground is fertile again, and this is rebirth. The imagery of fire makes the poem urgent. Let's move on to the next slide. And the next slide is air. Air imagery refers to all images of voice, sound. Air does 3 things in poetry. One is movement and freedom. Air carries things, ideas, prayers, rumors. In simple words, it travels. Secondly, invisibility with presence. You cannot see air, but you can feel it. That is why poets use air for spirit, for memory, and things we cannot touch, but we know they are there. An example here is the famous idiom, walls have ears. 3, the voice itself. Without breath, there is no speech. And without speech, there is no poetry. Air is literally the medium that carries our words. So air makes a poem feel light. or expansive, and sometimes unsettled, depending on whether it is a gentle breeze or a storm wind. An example here is words fly like birds. Next slide is the water imagery. Water imagery refers to all images of water itself, rain, rivers, seas, tears, drought, wells, saliva, and many others. Water in poetry is about emotion. That's why we say waves of grief or calm waters. Our feelings move like water. It is also about life and death. Water gives life, but too much of it drowns. And drought, the absence of water, means barrenness. Third point, water is for cleansing and memory. Rivers wash things. Rain baptizes. Water holds history. When water makes a poem emotional, then water makes a poem feel fluid. It goes in cycles. Slide earth imagery. And these are all images of the earth itself, the soil, stone, bricks, mountains, roots, dust, clay, flowers, trees, human beings ourselves, and all other terrestrial objects which are on land. Earth is a foundation and identity. It is home. It is ancestry. It is where we come from. When someone says, like in the poem Ancestral Stars by Omadang, to claim my space of inheritance, that is earth. Earth is also labor and the body. Farming is done on earth. Building is done on earth. Burying is done on earth. Sweat and weight. You know this well when you mold bricks. Earth is also stability and decay. It holds us. One day, it will surely receive us. So the main point here, earth grounds a poem. It makes it feel real, heavy, rooted. You can stand on it. Next slide is spatial poetry, spatial imagery. Spatial imagery are images of space, and space is a place or distance or direction, rooms, doors, borders, windows, even the balcony of your house. Space shows relationship. At your window means I'm close, and that's the relationship between you and me. Behind you means I'm following or hiding, and that is still space. If you are behind me, you are occupying a space behind me. Space also shows power and access. A gate or a wall or a door will always allow who gets in and who is kept out. Space in psychology, inner space is the mind, outer space is the world. And places like a window or a threshold are where the two meet. So, space turns a poem into a place. The reader can walk into it and stand there right with you. Slide 7 is about examples. where these material imaginations are used. And I will briefly take you to the poem, The Village Well, by a Ugandan poet, Henry Barlow. I will read a line or two, and you see what I'm trying to mean. I quote, "By this well, where fresh waters still quietly whisper." You realize these two lines? Whisper. Then the next line, "For she is dead, the one I first loved by the well." You realize the well or water also brings about memory. He still remembers the love. He still remembers the meeting because of the well. For fire, I'm a line from Caubadiano Dambara, a Cape Verdean poet. And the poem is Judgment of the Black Man. In his steady eyes, there kindled flames of a force which only the black man knows. To go back to fire imagery, the anger in this black man's eyes could easily spark a revolution. I hope we have been following well. Thank you so much.
Brilliantly done, Omadang, Yowasi, taking us deep into the most difficult and mysterious parts of poetry. If we can master these kinds of imagery, then we
Thank you.
will then we'll become kings of the craft. Omadang, share your details, please, in the chat. Interact with the people, answer the questions. I love your steadiness in giving and sharing this knowledge. So as we see, Omadang was telling us about the different types of imagery. And now if Marial is ready to take us into the sensory aspects, the aspect of sensation when it comes to imagery. What is imagery? Imagery is sensing the world. Marial, are you ready? Mr. Marial, could you please press unmute?
Yes, Anne. Can you hear me?
Yes, Mr. Marial, we can hear you.
Okay. I've been having problems trying to unmute. Sorry for the delays. Can you hear me?
Yes, you're audible.
Okay. Okay, thanks everyone. You know, I appreciate your patience, all these people who are available. I'm Marial Awendit, a poet, award-winning poet, and author of 5 poetry collections. And I will be taking you through imagery, the use of five senses in poetry. So let's go back to the definition of imagery first of all. Okay, imagery, I say, is the use of descriptive language that appeals to the human senses to create a clear mental picture in the poem or in a sentence. This is the definition of imagery. We can go next to the 5 senses. And
just continue, Mr. Marial. I'm having a network challenge.
I would like you to share the infographic about the 5 senses.
Sorry, my network is down, Mr. Marial. Just kindly continue.
Okay, what I would like to say is that imagery is the use of the 5 senses, that is the sense of touch, feeling, taste, and hearing, and actually tactile imagery deals with what we call the motion and movement. So when we use this in poetry, it becomes easy for us to appeal to the readers, to the senses of the readers. It becomes easy for us to engage the readers. So the functions, we go to the function of imagery. The function of imagery is trying to bring out the story so that we can engage with the story that is being told. Another one is to appeal to the senses of the reader. Another reason is to clarify the context through which the poem is being written. For example, if the screen could be shared, there are 2 poems that I talk about there in the presentation. One of them being the Red Wheelbarrow, and the other poem by Chinua Achebe, which is the refugee child. When you look at the two poems, you see that these poems represent different contexts. One is talking about the red wheelbarrow beside the white chicken, and another is talking about the refugee child. And there are many kinds of imagery that are being used in those poems. It's challenging that we don't have access to the slides. So I would like to end my presentation here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Marial. I'm very sorry for the loss of network, unable to share the screen. To all of the poets who have shared their knowledge, we'll be studying your work. Thank you so much for giving us tips, clues, and hints. I felt like I've been handed the secrets of poetry. We can now have a Q&A briefly. I can have 3 questions since we're far behind time. Please do raise your hand if you have a question for us, and we'll be able to give you the floor. Shema, kindly unmute and you ask your question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have 2 questions, but I'll start with the difference between symbolism and metaphorism. Like you explained it lightly, but I didn't quite get it. And also poetry versus prose.
Those are really great questions from Shaman. Who would like to tackle these two? You can just raise your hand from our facilitators if you would like to tackle the difference between symbolism and metaphor. So we had Joel presenting on symbols. Joel, are you able to help Shaman understand what the difference is between a symbol and a metaphor?
Yes, I am. Okay. I think metaphor is just like giving meaning to an object that is not in a literary sense. So it's like elevating a statement to feel poetic. For instance, time is a thief is metaphorical. It's trying to say that time steals and maybe steals patience and all of that. So metaphor is giving meaning to something. It's like a comparison between two like things. Then symbolism transcends that. It's, as I said earlier, is something that goes beyond its imminent self. We spoke about the Udara symbolizing home, symbolizing Africa. We spoke about khaki, normal uniform, but in the colonial era of a Nigerian history, it serves as a conscription, colonial conscription, and so many other things. So for me, metaphor is simply statements that are beyond literary meaning. Then symbolism is elevating some certain kind of then symbolism are symbols that gives meaning beyond itself. I hope you understand. Thank you.
Very well said, Joel. So I agree with Joel there that you see, metaphors are things that are not literal. We need to understand the word literal. But symbols are close to the literal. Gray, the color gray, is a symbol of old age. Why? Because elderly people usually have gray hair. So you see that the symbol is close to the literal reality. But the metaphor usually has nothing to do with the literal world. And that's why we say metaphor. Metaphor has nothing to do with the literal world. Metaphor is about the imagination. It's far beyond. I'm dancing on the moon. Things that can't happen, that's metaphor. In fact, I think the best way to understand what a metaphor is, it's a dream or even a nightmare. Those crazy things when you fly out the window, that's metaphor. That's the world of metaphor. Shaman, is it making sense?
Yes, I think it makes some sense. But then under that explanation, wouldn't it mean that time is a thief qualified as a metaphor?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, sure. It means the same.
Yes.
That's not symbolism, right?
No.
Okay.
No.
That's metaphor.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So, the thing about symbolism, they say that symbolism is universal. All of us, wherever you're from, we actually use symbols in the same way. If you think about what does water symbolize to all of us? Water is a symbol of life, isn't it? It's a universal symbol of life. What does the heart symbolize? To everyone, the heart symbolizes love, isn't it? So that's how symbols work. Symbols are very close to the earth, close to the ground, but metaphors are high up in the heavens, in the world of ideas, the world of dreams. That's how I think of symbols and metaphors, but it gets confusing. And I want all of you to know poetry is not easy. We don't have simple answers to these questions, and that's why we need to meet like this. Your other question, Shaman, the difference between prose and poetry. I feel that's another deep, that's a very deep question. I don't know who's able.
Well, I think yes, I can try my best for that one too. Prose is a natural everyday speech that runs directly. It's an everyday language structured into sentences and paragraphs. But when you go into poetry, it's a little bit and transcended, because poetry is an artistic condensed form of writing that relies heavily on rhythm, rhyme, and structural line breaks. I can decide, for instance, to tell the story of maybe my friend using prose. My friend is this, my friend is that. Straight up. There are not much rules in writing prose. I don't know if we all agree. But when writing poetry, you have writing poetry to a publicational sense, then we must look differently, because poetry demands a lot from you. So it is different between playing with poetry and actually writing poetry. So the difference is this: prose run up straight. You can write prose from one paragraph to a paragraph, telling a story, and the funny thing is that prose will actually spare you. If you, yes, you can play with words and all of that, but in literature you have to be economical. You have to watch every line of your poetry must work, must stick. There's no time for there's no time to waste a particular line. Once a line is weak, it is weak. Nothing can justify it. So that is the difference between poetry and prose. Prose go on straight up. Then poetry is a condensed form of writing that requires a lot from you. Thank you.
Nicely said again, Joel. I see that Ibrahim Yassin would like to tackle some of these questions. Ibrahim, go ahead. We'd love to hear your answers.
Yes, Anna. Yeah, I just agree with you about metaphor, that imagination about heaven. But there is a bridge. So here is my 2 cents regarding that. I think that symbolism often moves from the physical world to the world of ideas. So there is a link here. There is association between both. So it moves from the physical world to the world of idea. And that's why the reader first encounters the image through the senses before reaching its deeper meaning. Here, the deeper meaning actually represents the symbolism. Also, the abstract words. The abstract words can express concepts, but they are usually less powerful as symbols unless they are connected to concrete images. And you already mentioned before about that nouns often uses as symbols, while verbs and adjectives create that exchange and process to make it solid. So symbolism, I think it has this ground for us for moving from the concepts to concrete to the ground, as you mentioned. So while nouns as a symbol represent states, identities, or ideas, while verbs introduce that exchange and process, I think It's totally different from metaphor. Metaphor doesn't have these techniques.
Oh, okay, Ibrahim, that's very interesting, and I'd like you to explain a bit deeper. So first of all, I want to summarize what Ibrahim has said, and I do agree that even a symbol has spiritual content. We said that metaphor is 100% spiritual. There's almost no physical reality in a metaphor. A metaphor is 100% dream, but a symbol is part reality. For example, we take a cow, because you know the cow is on land, it's part reality. But the meaning of the cow, the idea that the cow brings, yes, it's true, it does go up as well. As that's what I got from you, Ibrahim, that even a symbol has the idea part of it, and the idea is the meaning, the extra meaning that you give to that physical thing. So now I want you to explain how a metaphor doesn't have those elements so that people can understand better. I think that Ibrahim has been logged out, but he'll come back to explain because he was on the right track. We had, okay, let me say something, Shama, about prose. In a way, we can simply say prose is a shape. Because if I write a poem and I put it in paragraph form, they'll call it a prose poem. So that tells us that one aspect of prose is just the paragraph shape. And whatever you do in that paragraph doesn't really matter. However, I think that there's one aspect that we should go a bit deeper into, which is narrative. Asking what's the difference between poetry and prose won't tell us much. But let's say, what's the difference, let's say, between narrative and poetry? Then you'll start to get more. You'll start to get something a bit richer. And it has nothing to do with the shape, the way it looks on the page. Now it's about the elements. That in narrative, you do storytelling. In narrative, you have character development. You have arcs. Do we need arcs in all kinds of poems? Not necessarily. You don't need narrative in all types of poems, such as dramatic poems or lyric poems or descriptive poems. So Shama, you've really challenged us. Thank you for those good questions. I saw a hand up from Davy. Davy, please go ahead, unmute and ask your question.
Well, my question is just direct. I made a cost of where the question that was raised, which has to do with prose and poetry, or prose and poem. But I've seen where there are some poets who we marry together prose and poem together, but it's not going to be like a direct prose work, but it's going to look like a form of where the style of a prose work is adopted using poetry technique to write a prose work. And my question is that because I've seen that, and I've also done some research where it was experimented in the French literary community. I've forgotten the poet's name, where this issue came up, that is it possible to write a poem in a prose form as far the tools of or the ingredient that makes up a poem is adopted to write a prose poem. So my question here is that, is it possible to write a poem using a prose form, or we can separate it together, separate the two together? You understand? What I'm saying is that is there a meeting point where a person will have to write a poem in a dramatic way. To write a poem also in a prose form, as far the poem has all the ingredients that makes up a poem, metaphor, symbolism, irony, all the ingredients, even some that we don't even use, up to like internal rhymes, end rhymes, oxymoron, others. As far as written in a very prose way, is it possible to merge the two together to achieve the message I want to be expressed? As far it's been used to project a work. That's the question I'm asking.
Absolutely, and the answer is yes, and writers are doing that. One of the more popular genres today is called hybrid. I'm sure we've all heard of it. That's when writers combine the poetic elements with, let's say, nonfiction elements, and they have usually, let's say, very poetic paragraphs, and it's a combination of prose, it's a combination of poetry and everything else. So, Davy, it is happening. It is possible. That prose form is full of possibilities. But I feel that there's a deeper way of looking at poetry, and it's to go into the genres. If you really want to understand this topic, learn more about what makes a poem dramatic. It's not the shape. It has nothing to do with the shape, whether it's vertical or block. No, it has to do with a lot of things like the mode, how the speaker in the poem is addressing someone. And is that person being addressed present? That's what makes a poem dramatic. But it has nothing to do with the block prose shape. So I see we have Caro coming in with a question. Please go ahead and unmute, Caro. Would love to hear from you.
Yeah, good evening from here, Nigeria. Yeah, Caro speaking. I just want to make the statement. There is such a thing as prose poetry. It's more like a new trend in literary studies and also in the writing system. So I think if he can study or read on that, it should clarify his point. There is a thing as prose poetry. It's more like a new thing now. People do that, like a practice. So thank you very much.
You're right, Caro. Do check out prose poetry. Do we have any other questions? I had seen, was it Hezi? There was someone called Hezi, but I think they were kicked out. I want to thank all of you for your contributions. We do have a group. Please raise your hand if you're not in the Pan-African Poetry group, and we'll share the link with you. Okay, I see some hands up. I'll put the link right here in the chat. Do join our group, connect with us. Our mission is to be Pan-African. And I think Pan-Africanism is about unity. We all have knowledge to share. We can help each other. Let's strengthen one another as poets. So the link to our group, the Pan-African Poetry group, is in the chat. Since I don't want to close before you join, as you're joining the group, I can take a question from, I see Chris Njembe. You have your hand up. As people are joining the group, let's give the floor to Chris. Go ahead and unmute Chris. Chris, the floor is yours. You may ask your question. Okay, I think if Chris Njembe is not able to unmute.
Good evening, Anna. Sorry, I just raised my hand when you asked to say who is in the Pan-African group. Sorry.
I didn't. Okay. We are all joining the group. Thank you so much. I would like to thank the PAWA team for making this workshop possible, to all of the volunteers, Thank you so much, PAWA, for giving us this platform to connect and to unify. And to our facilitators, you're doing such great work. You're talented poets helping others. For me, Anna Ziambo, have a good night.